This is Global Lotta. I'm Hindol Sengupta. Dr. Gautam Sen has joined me from London to talk about what is being described as a historic free trade agreement between India and the UK. Long awaited, was going to happen just before Diwali in 2022. Did not happen at that time, has just happened. Dr. Sen will walk us through what he expects from this FTA. Some people in Delhi are already happy that whiskey prices and car prices, especially of Range Rovers, will come down. But of course, it's far more complex than that. Dr. Sen, welcome.
Thank you, Hindol.
Let's begin by asking you, what is your first reaction?
I have to confess, I was not in favor of a free trade treaty, nor was our mutual friend, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, the late Dr. Debroy. But I feel now, having seen the detail, I haven't seen the entire treaty that is still on its way to me. The government hasn't released it, I believe. Much ado about nothing. It is not free trade in any shape or form. It's a selective relaxation of tariffs in a number of sectors. I'm afraid not very much has happened. And just to jump ahead and look at the number they're expecting in 2040, I think of $66 billion, rising from 45. If you take into account inflation between now and 2040, I don't think the jump is going to be very significant. So actually not very much has happened. The government of India has been very careful and calculating in how it has negotiated the treaty. And the economics and commerce that has been negotiated favors India, if you go by numbers. But there is a larger political issue, like the Ottawa imperial preference system of 1932 that the British imposed on the empire, and the fact that the British will have greater physical access for their people. This I find a little bit worrying, because you can be sure once they get in, they will form alliances and friendships with Indians who are ready to sell their souls. And God knows what mischief they may get up to, not just in this area of commerce, but in the political arena, as we can see with the BBC, which has been active in so many ways, and amnesty, etc. But that is in the future. But apparently not very much is going to happen between now and 2035 and 2040. So that's all a long, long way off.
A little bit about India's vantage point in this treaty. Any particular advantages you see for India, especially for its agrarian products?
Well, the biggest advantage, if I'm not mistaken, will be in the clothing sector, because Indian clothing is subject to, I believe, 18% duty compared with the least developed country like Bangladesh. So these countries like Kenya, Bangladesh, which have a tariff advantage, will lose it. I don't know if that is wholly a good thing, because the more economic distress in Bangladesh, the larger the traffic coming towards our borders. But that is an advantage. The Indian clothing sector will gain, because our products are competitive and high quality, but they had this disadvantage until now. But I don't know how quickly this will unfold. So that's one area. We are also a major exporter of jewelry, and that too, I think, will have significant advantage. As far as I can tell, India has conceded very little in agriculture and dairy products. As we know, this is a very sensitive sector in India, and any external competition will mean farmers in the streets of Delhi in no time. So no government will wish to embark on this course of action, even if it so wished. It is a non-starter. Our agricultural reform must precede for a significant time before any opening of international trade in agricultural products. So that has not happened. The demand which was made by the UK, as by many other Western countries, the United States, of compliance with labor standards has been agreed, but at a slow pace, but very significantly, it has not been made mandatory, because labor standards would be an Achilles heel for India, because we simply cannot compete with the higher labor standards of advanced economies, because it would be very costly, and we actually don't even have the larger societal socio-economic infrastructure which would facilitate the implementation of the higher labor standards, even if we could do it at the level of the individual factory. There are other collateral issues. So India has not agreed to their mandatory imposition. That is very important. So it appears the Indian negotiators were giving very little away. Let me move aside a little bit for a moment. I'll come back to these
Before you move
sectoral issues.
aside, I want to ask you one question. There has already been talk, because you mentioned textiles, which is a very important point, and I want to come to that. There's been a lot of question about already a fragile Bangladesh, for instance, already trying to come out of the LDA status. Now, if India gets very competitive in textiles, one of the biggest hits, of course, will be Bangladesh. And already our eastern border is quite restive. How do you see that play out? I know you said that this won't happen in a hurry, but certainly there is over a time period, this might happen.
I have always maintained, and I've spoken about that to many people in government and outside, that hurting the Bangladeshi clothing sector, which is not textiles, it's clothing. It's clothing which is subject to high tariffs. And that's why there are many Indian investors in Bangladesh and Kenya and other countries not subject to this. The damage to the Bangladeshi economy is potentially quite serious, and the consequences for India in terms of population movement far more costly than anything we'll gain in terms of market access to the UK or indeed anywhere else. So we need to ponder this and not allow ourselves to be carried away by just the sectoral gains to the clothing sector. This would be prudential to take into consideration that do we want to hurt Bangladesh? They will be hurt, definitely, because we have one advantage that they don't. We have economies of scale because of our market size, and that's where we will score. Let me then just quickly cover a couple of other areas which are in the agreement. I don't remember all of them, but we have agreed to freer trade in aerospace. And if you think about aerospace in India, it basically is HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. And of course, there are many private players, but the buyer is usually HAL directly or indirectly. The smaller players actually remain relatively minor. So, in effect, in economic terms, HAL is a monopsony controlled by the government. So, what the UK will sell to the Indian aviation market will be dictated by government policy. And we do want Rolls-Royce engines. Absolutely. We have, I believe, signed a deal. And all of this is actually some likely to have happened anyway. So we have not basically given away very much. Indirectly, we may even have gained some advantage because there will be an incentive for UK firms to involve themselves with the growing Indian aviation sector, which is going to really be growing very fast. So maintenance, spares, etc., all of this will be bought. Not everything will be made in India, but we have plans to not import anything we can make in India because not everything is very high-tech, engines apart. Automobiles and whiskey have excited people both in India and abroad. I'm afraid all this excitement is premature. As a fan of good automobiles and the occasional tipple, I am very interested.
Well,
Now,
the,
let
well, well,
me.
the Scots, Dr. Sen, you say this, but the Scots are saying that this is the best thing that could have ever happened to them. And now single malt prices will significantly fall. And, a lot of new products can come in. So they're very excited.
I'm afraid, yes, they will gain some advantage. considering the duty is going to fall from 150% to 75, and then in 2040 to 40%. So it is not open sesame, right? But think about this scenario. One of India's malts won the first prize in a global competition, right? I forget the name. Another very good Indian whiskey is available in Marks and Spencer in London called Amrut.
That's right, from Bangalore.
I've tasted it. It's very good. And it is not being sold as a low-priced bottle of whiskey here. It costs £35, £38. You can buy cheaper malt for 25 if you know where to look. So, first thing, they should worry about Indian competitors in the long run. And Indian competitors may have this strange advantage of lower average costs because the Indian market is growing. Some would say, unfortunately, and I sympathize with this sentiment that Indians should not be drinking so much scotch. But also bear in mind, we have a very bizarre duty system in India whereby we tax by volume, not by alcohol content. So you pay less for whiskey than for wine. So please, somebody look at this and change this to make whiskey more expensive. It is good for India and it'll be good for our wine sector. So, and the other thing, which I think we have discussed in the past, it takes a long time because of weather conditions for malt to mature in the UK.
Yeah,
It
I was just about to
matures
say it.
much.
If you don't care about the traditional, I've written stories about this also. If you don't care about the, how much time it spends in a cask or a barrel, so to speak, Indians can make whiskey at a far faster rate, essentially, because the angel's share happens much faster in our climatic conditions. That's
This
absolutely
is
correct.
exactly the point.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, yes, snobbery and labeling counts. I mean, I would always be tempted to go for a Macallan than for an Indian brand. But if you look at the literature on tasting and discussion, high-end buyer goes for taste. There's some who buy to keep as a store of value, but the high-end buyer looks at quality, and quality is discussed ad nauseum in the media which deals with this. So if Indians make good whiskey, they have a fighting chance of taking a chunk of the British market. And bear in mind, we have another 15 years, and still the duty will be 40%. At the lower end of the market, where they will score, the bottom line is Indians are very price conscious. Yes, there are people in Delhi, I know a lot of people who will say, yeah, this is imported. But if the price differential is sufficiently large and they're drinking privately with only their wife to look over their shoulder and grimace, they will drink the local brand because whiskey is a relatively expensive product in the uh, scheme of things. So they're not going to buy White and Mackay, which actually, in my opinion, is very mediocre whiskey. And they rather go for Amrut and something. And our labeling, our marketing is quite impressive. Indians have learned the
Oh, and
game.
there are a lot of very good Indian brands coming up. There's a new one called Indri. You may have heard of it. Lots of
That
awards
is
have
a
won.
very good whiskey, but unfortunately, that's quite expensive, actually.
That's
That's a
right.
very
And then there
expensive.
is also Paul John from Goa, which is also quite famous and has also won awards and so on and so forth. Actually, Dr. Sen, what you're explaining essentially, this is exactly how Japanese whiskey once really took over and entered large markets like the UK market or the American market. Very similar. And so has Taiwanese whiskey.
Japanese whiskey is a very good example. It's superb to the palate, and they have taken a chunk of the high-end market. And you see, in 2002-3, when I was in Delhi, Indian red wine was undrinkable. It really was undrinkable. I only discovered one white wine which was drinkable. Now look at the Indian wine market. Indians have learned, and wine growers have learned. This is the private sector note. The private sector works. They have learned making wine requires a bit of love and tender care. Do not be in a hurry. Mature the product and don't adulterate. And there are very good Indian red wines Very good. Of course, it is still hard to compete with the top end of the French market, Californian market, even the Australian market. But in the middle level, Indian wines are perfectly good. When I come to India, I am very happy to order Indian red wine. White wine is good. So, we have a very big market, and we need to really dominate this market, not worry about exports. But that I think we will do in time, and 2040 is far away. Now, let's talk about vehicles.
Yes, that's the other one. Lots of excitement. I saw lots of people putting up that a Rolls-Royce. I don't know which model they were talking about, which costs about 80 lakh rupees in India, will go down to about 40 to 50. That's about a 20 to 30 lakh straight away out. That's a lot of savings.
No, but the reduction in duty will take place over time. It is not happening overnight, and a 10% duty will remain. So this duty reduction still gives enough breathing space for Indian manufacturers who are getting better. Volume market, you have to manufacture in India because the Indian manufacturer has a big advantage in the volume market, and that market is being provided with excellent. I mean, there are Indian cars selling for 3.5 lakhs. The cheapest one sold by the Bajaj company, I believe, is 3.5 lakhs. Now, only the Chinese could compete in this market, nobody else. Now, which end of the market will be impacted? What cars are Indians driving? If you go around Delhi, Bombay, the rich, they are driving German cars, and
Japanese cars.
high-end Japanese cars, Lexus, BMW, Audi, Mercedes. Relatively few are driving Range Rover.
Rovers.
There are quite a few, but relatively
Yeah.
fewer. But that's made by an Indian company in England. So
JLR.
if they're doing well, some of the dividend income is going to come to India. Now, at that high end, because we still do not have a volume market for the high end, they will take advantage because they really want to export to us. People who make relatively few sales really can't set up manufacturing in India. But that too will change. As that segment of the market begins to grow, transportation costs will dictate manufacturing in India. And there are many other advantages like supply chain. Like India is a big supplier in auto parts, like Mexico. So, given that the government of India has been very careful, it has given our manufacturers time to adapt and adjust. So, I'm not unduly worried. For medical equipment, yes, much greater freedom is desirable because it will drive costs down. But even this market, India is a big market and there are many people in India. See, we have not been outstanding in machine tools and quality instruments. We haven't been. But then in the 1930s, these instruments, which came from Japan, were regarded as substandard. People used to make jokes. Look what Japan, where it reached, took them 40 years, 1960s. This market is increasingly occupied by China, which made very poor quality for a long time. Now increasingly occupied. Now, China has an advantage we will not be able to compete with. They have artificially inflated R&D budgets through indirect state subsidy, and they have volume on a scale we will never match. We will never match that. So the grave danger to India, and this is something I hope our people have talked about. I wrote about this in my articles in India when I was opposing the FTA. But as I said, there's no FTA. It's a selective lowering of duties. Chinese investors will look at this as a golden opportunity to enter the UK as investors. And they're getting desperate because a lot of US and UK investors in China are moving towards Vietnam, India, Malaysia, and elsewhere. So they will want to move because a private entrepreneur won't worry about China because that will not guarantee their survival as an enterprise. They will want to move to the UK. And the UK already has 100 billion pounds worth of Chinese investments. And bear in mind, Rachel Reeves, who has wrecked the British economy, nevertheless went off to China. And I can bet my bottom dollar, they said, look here, come to us and sell to India. Now, I have seen somewhere the government of India has raised some concern over this, but the sectors in which the lowering have duties has taken place on sectors in which it will be relatively easy for India to monitor. Because in the service sector, it will be very difficult to unfailingly enforce rules of origins. And
Anyway, rules of
Chinese,
origin are notorious for being tough to crack down on.
they're a nightmare. And in the service sector, it's a bigger nightmare. And things made in China completely can come out of the UK labeled UK manufacturer by simply having an office and some stuff. So, but we have learned the game much better because, as you have correctly noted, rules of origin are a problematic area. So we have made enough provision in the way we have opened the Indian market to be able to monitor what the Chinese get up to. And as for high-end cars, BMW and Mercedes will still come from abroad, and Shah Rukh Khan and the big boys and the Reliance Skyans will still pay the duty, which is good. They should pay duty for these expensive products, pay more than their share of taxes. So I think we have not done badly, but I should now go on to what is being said over here.
Oh,
There is opposition across the board.
especially about this rule that I think the Indian workers will get a reprieve of 1 year for paying for pensions. Pension, what
No,
is
no,
it
no.
called?
There's
It's called something. Pension something.
three-year exemption
Yeah.
for national insurance contributions,
National
but
insurance, not pension. Sorry. Yes.
only for inter-firm transfer of workers who may be getting Indian salaries. So in fact, that gives them a bit of an advantage. But we are talking about inter-firm transfer. So Indian company opens an office, they will bring their own staff. It will be like HP1 in the US,
Yeah.
a bit like that, but
Yeah.
more relaxed. I'm not sure, but I thought there was a numbers limit of how many that has been imposed. But Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party, said, I refused to give up this when I was negotiating as business secretary. The Reform Party says it is an appalling agreement. The Liberal Democrat says absolutely the same thing. So everybody's upset. And some of the things they're saying are blatantly inaccurate and an indication of their colonial hangover and the irrepressible racial sentiments which arise watching their dependents grow on their former colony of India. One example,
Yeah.
I've just seen a discussion of people ranting and raving. These Indians will come and get free health care. This is false. Indians will have to pay the National Health Service surcharge on entry, as they should. I am a beneficiary of the National Health, and it is overcrowded. It is not very well run, but it's an enormous advantage to have free healthcare at point of
Yeah.
delivery. And why should outsiders get that for free? So the National Health Surcharge will be applied to these temporary workers as it should. But everybody here is getting excited because they can't stand the idea that they came with a begging bowl, basically, all the leaders. And we, in our generosity, because no matter what we say, what talk we engage in, we tend to say, "Theek hai, all right, let's forgive and forget." The ghost of Gandhi is always sitting on our shoulder. So we always give it. But bear in mind, there are some issues which we have not considered enough, though we have some leverage now because of the relationship, which could be relevant to what I'm about to say. The British Labour Party, as J.D. Vance has said brutally, will lead the first Islamic government of the UK. I didn't say that. You didn't say that. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, said that. The Labour Party is a prisoner of the Pakistani constituency. So we have given a gift to the people whom the Pakistanis have put in government and will continue to do even more in the next election. Come a crisis, Pakistanis will start demanding sanctions against India. Don't sell them Rolls-Royce engines. These are dual use. They will help Indian to fly fighter planes. Worse than that, the Chinese will get the Pakistanis to do it on their behalf as well. Anything China wants, the Pakistanis will give them. So if they get Pakistanis mobilized on behalf of China, this is bad news for us. This is a possibility we need to consider. The other thing Despite all the talk and nonsense of intelligence sharing, Khalistanis continue to have carte blanche. They endangered the security of our external affairs minister not very long ago. And he came within 25, 30 feet of his vehicle. His physical security was endangered. And that is a no-no. But we, in our generosity, complained and let it pass. The British government also continues to take actions inimical to the interests of Hindus. They are saying a lot of the troubles in urban areas and Leicester, where the riots took place, was due to Hindutva, which is a code for Narendra Modi. They are saying this man has spread his ideology and Hindus are mobilized militantly. All of that has been proven to be completely
I thought there was a
unequivocally
full report
false.
about Leicester which said this was not true.
There are reports, but the public feeling is that this is a bit mixed up, but it is totally false. For example, one thing that these Goan Hindus, these people who came via Portugal, came in large numbers. The census data the following month or a bit later showed the biggest increase in population in Leicester has been that of Muslims and Pakistanis, not Hindus. So even that is not true. Hindus did not launch any attacks in Leicester, but there is a certain blame game because you don't want to offend the Pakistanis who vote you into power. That will not cease with the Labour Party in government, and the Labour Party is going to come back in 2029. Definitely, because the Reform Party will perform the great service it did last year of splitting the Tory vote. Every time they split the Tory vote, the Labour Party gains advantage. So they will have a smaller majority because many people are angry with them, but they will come back to power. And this Labour Party is a hostage to Islamabad. They can say whatever they like, but I have observed them for decades, and they are very good at fibbing. But
No, and especially with all this Mirpuri influence and all of that. I mean, look at what's happening with the grooming gangs issue.
grooming gang is a very salutary reminder of how low they have sunk to please their Pakistani Mirpuri constituency. The scale of the assault on young, white, and Hindu and Sikh girls also, quite a lot of Sikh girls, it was horrendous. One number I'm reading, I don't know if it's true or not, is 250,000. Only 800 people have been imprisoned, only 800. They're saying one third of all the men of Rochester, Rotherham were involved, one third of all the Pakistani men. Only 800 have been prosecuted and imprisoned. There have been no deportation. These are all dual nationals. They could have been sent away after they served their sentences. But the British government is now a hostage. The people who sponsored the Muslim League in 1906 have been caught out by the same phenomenon. So we are negotiating with people who I have been told are regarded in Delhi as an adversarial country like Canada, quote unquote. A Modi minister said that to me, that they are adversaries like Canada. Okay, it does not mean we do not deal with them. It does not mean we do not negotiate with them. And what we've negotiated on the whole is good for us because we haven't really conceded that much. And because of Trump's tariffs, and 18% of Indian exports in manufacturing go to the United States, 18%, it is probably wise to diversify to get that percentage down. So this is the name of the game, and I congratulate our negotiators, the Prime Minister's office, for taking everything on board and coming out with something which I feared would be terrible, and it is not.
On that optimistic note, Dr. Sen, we'll have to leave it right there. Thanks very much for talking this issue through with us on the so-called FTA, Free Trade Agreement, between India and the United Kingdom. We will no doubt see how this plays out in the years to come. Thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Hindol.